Thanks for joining us today. My name's Kathy Osmondson with the State Fire Marshal Division, and we're here today to share some ideas about building your youth fire prevention intervention team, reaching out to the key players that it really takes for the intervention. And we'll be having a panel discussion with some subject matter experts, but first I'd like to introduce Dana Hurley-Swayze from our Minnesota Office of Justice Programs. She will give an overview of the justice side of youth fire setting and talk a little bit about coalition building. Thank you, Dana. Take it away.
Thank you. Hello, as Kathy said, my name is Dana Hurley-Swayze. I am an employee of the Department of Public Safety, and I focus almost exclusively on issues of juvenile justice. So what I'm hoping to do today is to talk about juvenile diversion. This is an area of the justice system where fire prevention and intervention programming are relevant, and how we're going to treat these kids as they're overlapping both with juvenile justice issues and fire setting behavior. Most of this presentation was presented earlier this year at the Minnesota Fire Marshal Conference. So just to know that this has been information that's been presented before, and that you can get a feel for some of the content that we presented then, and also some of the panel members that you'll be hearing from later today. So some of the goals of this presentation that I have for you is to learn a bit more about what juvenile diversion is and what youth are eligible to receive juvenile diversion, what juvenile diversion typically entails from a programmatic standpoint, and then some of the purposes and benefits of diversion, why we want to keep kids out of the juvenile justice system whenever possible. I'm going to show a couple of slides that illustrate juvenile crime trends, actually over the last 20 to 30 years, so we can kind of see where we've been and where we're going in that regard. I'm going to present a little bit of research about what is known and unknown about juvenile diversion programming in the state. And then, as Kathy alluded, I'm hoping that this will help you to connect to juvenile diversion programs and providers in your local community, so that you can do some of that coalition building, some education, and get referrals to your program for appropriate youth who are involved in the justice system. So the first question to answer is, what is juvenile diversion in the first place? So basically, it's often called pretrial diversion. And what this is it's a prosecutor's decision that a kid would be better served outside of the formal juvenile justice system. So perhaps they get a referral for some sort of a delinquent behavior. And upon review, they decide that keeping this kid in a community setting and not having a juvenile crime on their record would be a better, more responsive alternative than having them go through the formal court system and process. Back in 1994, a statute was passed that required all county attorneys in the state, of which there are 87 counties, to establish a juvenile diversion program to be in effect by 1995. So we've had this around for about 20 years now. Typically, those who are referred for diversion are going to be first-time offenders. They're usually lower-level delinquents without serious offenses or any sort of a significant criminal history. So offenses that are very commonly referred to diversion include issues with tobacco, minor consumption or minor possession of alcohol, perhaps small possession of marijuana or paraphernalia. Other offenses that we frequently see are some status type offenses like curfew violations, shoplifting and minor theft, and also activities like property damage and disorderly conduct. So some of these things that we see are very common offenses to be committed by minors, and we want to try to do an intervention rather than a more consequence-based response. So in terms of what youth are eligible for diversion in the state of Minnesota, technically any offense is eligible for diversion. The statute doesn't limit what level of offense can be diverted. So in Minnesota, we have 4 different levels of offenses. We have what would be called status offenses. These are those acts that are illegal for a juvenile solely because of their age. So these are things like curfew, truancy, the minor possession of tobacco and alcohol. And then there are some what would be called petty misdemeanors. These are again, low-level offenses. There are misdemeanors, there are gross misdemeanors, and the most serious are felony offenses. And again, there's no restriction on any of these offenses from being diverted. What we do have is that there are some certain types of offense that cannot be diverted, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Again, in terms of eligibility, a youth is eligible if they have not been found guilty, or the term you might be familiar with is convicted, but for juveniles it's called adjudicated delinquent. So they have to have no prior adjudication. They cannot have been diverted before either. So the statute is intended to be a one-time opportunity. So no prior offenses, no prior diversions. Now that said, we've done some research, and we found that many counties will divert youth multiple times if their resources allow them to. I'm sorry, I apologize, I think I skipped one, but technically, youth who have an offense against a person also are not supposed to be diverted in statute. So these would be things like assaults, things of that nature. But again, many counties will divert low-level assaults, especially if both of the parties were juveniles or they're known to each other, or they think that the youth and the victim would benefit from doing a mediation or something along those lines. So while these are the statutory requirements, really there's a broad range of offenses that can and will be diverted in the state. So what kinds of things does diversion typically entail? When a kid is diverted, what kind of activities are we talking about? Again, this can vary widely from county to county, but things that we very commonly see are things like a class or an educational component. There may be a cognitive behavioral intervention where you're trying to get youth to think differently about their choices and their values, things of that nature. Often assignments or homework. Community work service is probably one of the most common aspects of diversion that we're going to see. Sometimes kids are earning money towards paying restitution back to a victim if they've damaged property, which, as may be the case with a juvenile fire setter, if they've set something on fire and have caused a certain amount of damage, they might be ordered to repay some of that money. There are some programs that do, again, a little bit more sophisticated interventions. So these may be things like victim offender mediation or restorative justice, where you're bringing those people together to repair the harm of their activity. They may be doing mental health screening, chemical dependency screening and referral, mentoring and counseling. So really depending, again, on the resources of the county, what kinds of offenses they divert, and the needs of the child, these programs can have many different components. So the goals of juvenile diversion, the statute states that the goals of diversion are to provide an alternative to adjudication, that formal court process, and also to have that emphasis on the restorative justice, so repairing the harm to the community and also to the victim. A benefit of doing diversion is that it really does reduce caseload burdens for offenses going to court, so court calendars, public defenders. There's a cost saving that's associated with processing kids informally as opposed to through the formal court system. The goal is to minimize what is called recidivism or reoffending among offenders, among youth. The collection of restitution to be paid to the victim is a goal of diversion. And just to have a responsible alternative to the justice system for kids where public safety can be served by using this method. There are some additional benefits to diversion that are not necessarily dictated in statute. One of the really nice things about diversion is that it can be more timely than the court process. It's a decision that can be made more quickly. Youth can get involved in a program most likely faster than they could go all the way through the court process and, for instance, get court ordered to an intervention. So that timeliness from a research standpoint is a very powerful thing in terms of the learning opportunity for the youth to change a behavior, but also to restore the harm to the victim in a timely manner as well. So that is one of the benefits. Another benefit is that really our most formal court processes should be reserved for our highest risk youth, and typically those who are receiving diversion would be considered lower risk or to reoffend. An additional benefit is that typically it helps to connect kids and families more to their community. We try to use community-based providers. That may be true for youth fire setting services, that this is something they're receiving in their hometown in a timely way that's connecting them to local resources instead of them being a court-ordered program, perhaps. It gives kids the opportunity to own their behavior and repair the harm. It also helps to eliminate what are called collateral consequences of the juvenile justice system. So when kids get involved in the justice system and wind up getting a criminal record, this can follow them throughout not only their adolescence but also into their adulthood. And it can affect things like their ability to get certain types of employment, to get certain types of housing, student loans, military service, other civic responsibilities such as voting. So the more you can keep kids out of the justice system, the less likely they are to have these collateral consequences that follow them further down the line. So to the extent that we can keep them on the front end, it's just kind of holistically better for the youth in the grand scheme of their life. And then finally, research really shows that even some more serious delinquents and even those who commit some violent crime typically stop offending on their own. This is just called desistance, and basically, as we are youth, we are impulsive and we make poor choices, and as we grow and age and mature physically and intellectually, we tend to age out of this offending behavior, and that often happens regardless of if any intervention occurs. So we want to err on the side of a minimal intervention with the hope that some of this behavior will just desist on its own. There's an organization called the Minnesota Juvenile Justice Coalition. I believe that one of the members is going to be involved in the panel of experts, but they are very interested in diversion. Something that they did not too terribly long ago is called the return on investment analysis. And so they tried to explore what the financial costs and benefits are of diversion. On the slide, there's an illustration of some of the costs that are associated with keeping kids, for instance, in a detention facility, having them do 90 days of court-ordered correctional treatment, and then ultimately the annual cost of keeping them incarcerated as an adult. And the estimate that they came up with was close to a $4 million cost to society to have a youth involved in the deep end of the justice system. Conversely, they looked at the benefits of investing in youth who are having problems. For instance, Minnesota has the Minnesota Youth Intervention Programs, which are called the YIP programs. So if you invest a couple $1,000s perhaps in a youth in a YIP program, provide them some support with workforce development and job training, and then ultimately are able to get them into a university type setting, you have a relatively small cost compared to that almost $4 million of correction spending, and you ultimately will get a return on investment, and that youth is on a positive trajectory where they're going to be employed, and they have estimated that the benefit to society is close to $1 million in tax contributions over the lifetime of that child by keeping them employed, educated, and out of a correctional facility. I have just a couple of slides that relate to juvenile crime trends in Minnesota over the last 30 years. Juvenile diversion was implemented, as I said, in about 1994 and 1995 at a time when juvenile crime was really peaking not only in Minnesota but in the United States as a whole. So this became an important time to think about how we wanted to have different interventions with these youth, given the trajectory that they were on. So you'll be able to see in the middle of this slide that in 1994 and 1995, crime is taking this is juvenile arrests are taking a very high peak, peaking in about 1998, and that we have since had a very precipitous decline over the last 10 to 15 years in juvenile involvement in crime. On the slide, kind of circled there in the tan color, are the years that juvenile diversion statutes went into effect. So the hope is that these have been, at least in part, an effective way of intervening with these kids and helping to have a better justice system response for them. A primary motivator, honestly, at that point was that the court system was so overloaded with the volume of youth coming in that they had to do something different to address low-level offending behavior. And this, because we are speaking about fire prevention and intervention, this slide is arrests of juveniles for arson. And you can see that, again, those peak years mirror the peak years of crime overall. So we have in the kind of early to mid 90s our highest juvenile arson rates recorded. And then our most recent data in 2013 and 2014 shows that we're having fewer than 50 arrests related to arson specifically. And this, again, this decline is across the board in offense categories. So we're seeing it not only in arson, but also in all other types of offenses, this decline. And then this, I believe, is the final data slide, shows the court volume, again, trying to illustrate the effect of diversion, prevention, and intervention. Again, circled there in tan are the years that juvenile diversion went into effect. And what we can see, the bars that are in blue are kind of more serious offenses. They're misdemeanors, gross misdemeanors, and felonies, so they would be called delinquency referrals. And you can see that at the time of diversion, that delinquency referrals to court began to decline. And that's partially because we are filtering them out of the juvenile justice system through diversion, and partially because we actually reclassified some misdemeanors as petty misdemeanors, made them a lesser charge. Again, to try to reduce some of these collateral consequences and the burden on the justice system. So diversion is a very important part of the juvenile justice system. It is acknowledged as a formal stage of processing, and yet it's probably the stage of the system that receives the least attention, the least kind of professional coalition building compared to other justice system decision points. So there's a lot of representation on behalf of law enforcement in our state, many professional organizations, also for county attorneys and public defenders. And then as we get deeper into the system and we are into juvenile corrections, probation, facilities, there are many state agencies, many professional associations, and even many advocacy groups that are very interested in those stages of the system, and diversion kind of stands alone. So part of, I believe, the goals of this training session are how to strengthen diversion, make it a stronger aspect of the juvenile justice system, and how fire setting programs can be a part of the important stage of diversion. So because juvenile diversion programs exist in all 87 counties, and there really is statute that guides diversion, but really no very formal direction in terms of what diversion needs to look like and who can be diverted. These programs can vary widely. Our office completed a study in 2014 trying to get a better understanding of juvenile diversion programs around the state. And so we know that the 87 counties have approximately 129 different programs that are in effect. The majority of counties, 75% of them, just have one single diversion program that they use to serve all different types of offenders and offenses. It's estimated that about a quarter of all arrests go through a diversion program. So again, it is a significant number of youth, and it is an important stage in the justice system. As I think I mentioned earlier, many of the most common targeted offenses are alcohol, tobacco, and drug-related, shoplifting and theft, curfew violations, and disorderly conduct, some of those lower-level offenses. We did ask counties if they will divert fire offenses. 16 of the 87 counties specifically said that yes, they will divert fire-related or arson-related offenses. But only 2 counties specifically said that they had an intervention program that was designed for fire setting behavior. Those 2 counties at the time were Anoka and Dakota counties having a youth fire prevention and intervention program. So we learned through this study that there is a great variability in the types of services provided, the length of the juvenile diversion commitment, eligibility criteria, and the content of the programming. So when you are talking about building coalitions, one county may have a very different juvenile diversion program than a neighboring county, and if that might be an entire region for which you're responsible, you will find that you need to connect with county officials individually and learn about what services they have and provide. There are also some things that we do not know about juvenile diversion in the state. Again, because we have these 87 different counties, there's no centralized database on juvenile diversion. So while we can make some estimates, we don't know in any given year exactly how many kids are diverted or are successful. We don't know their rates of reoffending typically. We might, again, know it for a single county, but collectively for the state, we have a ways to go in terms of understanding the effectiveness of diversion. And so we don't know if, for instance, diversion is most effective for shoplifters or most effective for alcohol violators, or may or may not be more effective for fire-related offenses compared to other types of offenses. So these are some gaps that we need to try to fill in. So as the analyst that I am, I always promote data collection, data. Trying to standardize the data that you collect across your programs, your fire prevention programs, being consistent in the data that you collect so that you can ultimately make some global statements about the impact of fire diversion programming in the same way that I'd like to be able to make statements about diversion as a whole. But again, the information is very important to collect and to have. Without it, we have to use best guesses and at times even speculate. So finally, I'd like to wrap up with a few slides talking about how to connect to your diversion program providers in your area. Some things to keep in mind: that the party that screens kids for the appropriateness of diversion it's often the county attorney or a court intake office, but these may not be the people who are actually providing the diversion service. That program might stay in-house at a county attorney. It's often contracted out to, for instance, the local juvenile probation department. So you will have to engage with multiple stakeholders in order to get information out about your program and get referrals for your program. So you will likely need to be talking to the county attorney, perhaps court staff, court intake staff, and judges, also probation providers. And then oftentimes these counties are contracting with other community-based providers. So in any given region, you might have many people that you want to connect with in order to get the word out about your program and get appropriate referrals. So you want to kind of figure out who in your area does screening and who in your area does the program delivery, and those are folks that you want to connect with. As you are wanting to sell your program, you need to let them know what referrals would be appropriate for you to receive, as a county attorney might be getting cases that are referred by police departments or schools. They need to have an idea about who you would want to see in your education and intervention program. And you can also ask them what approach they have to their kids who might be who they may receive referral for fire-related offenses. You can ask them if they have any specific interventions that they do for that population, if there's specific kids that they will or won't take related to any fire-related offenses, and kind of find out what their services are presently for these youth and how they differ from kids that are there for other delinquency-type behaviors. So the important education piece that youth fire prevention programs are going to need to do is the education of these professionals and these stakeholders. So if you have a service to offer, you need to be able to articulate well what that service is, how it's offered, where it's offered, when it's offered. You need to be able to let them know if there's any cost to them, not only the family and the kids and the participants, but are you expecting any compensation from, for instance, the county attorney's office to provide a service. Talk about where your referrals typically are coming from, if you're getting them from schools or families, if you get them from firefighters on the scene, or where you will take referrals for fire behavior. Because even if they're not getting delinquency referrals from police, they may be getting calls from concerned families that their kid's exhibiting fire-related interest or behavior that they're worried about. So obviously just any kind of education that you can give to these justice system stakeholders about your program and the intervention you provide would be beneficial. You're going to want to let them know if you will take a kid as a diversion before they go to court, but also if you're willing to program kids after they go to court. So if they don't get diverted and they wind up going through the court process, can the judge court order a kid to attend your youth fire prevention program? If you'll take those kind of kids, let them know that. Again, it's a good resource for them to have. And then be sure that you give them detailed information on who are appropriate referrals for your program. If it's age-specific, offense-specific, I have listed on the slide a variety of different types of offenses. I presume you'd want not only arson-related, but what about negligent fires, lighters and ignition devices? How about dangerous smoking, fireworks, explosives, any other kind of incendiaries or hazardous materials? So what is the scope of youth behavior that you're willing to address? If they know that, then they can make an appropriate decision on if they should refer youth to your program. So the most important thing is that it's going to take quite a bit of relationship building and education to get county attorneys and probation departments and courts on board with your program. But typically these folks are going to be, I would say, very interested in working with you. Because fire setting is kind of considered its own unique offense category, most counties are not probably going to have a quality service and intervention geared towards these youth. So if that's something you can bring to them, it is definitely something that I believe you will receive referrals for it. And you also have a great role in being able to educate these people as they're receiving referrals. You can tell them, as county attorneys or as probation officers, what are the most concerning behaviors you see relating to fire safety, what are concerning attitudes that where you could say, if you see a kid that's involved in this kind of attitude or this kind of behavior, that's a red flag from a fire safety standpoint and from what we know about youth fire setters. So, a county attorney or a probation officer or a judge might not be able to discern a concerning fire setting behavior from a less concerning fire setting behavior. So if that's education you can provide, then you're going to get your most appropriate and important referrals and intervention opportunities. So again, the system providers are going to want as many diversion opportunities as possible. And if you can provide that resource to them and demonstrate that you're going to meet the unique needs of this child and the specific to their behavior, they're going to be interested. So make sure that you can show them that you're going to provide a quality, timely intervention, and I think really good partnerships will develop in your local areas. That wraps up this informational piece on juvenile diversion. There will be a panel of experts that are going to talk about how some of these concepts get applied in the field and who have some experience doing juvenile diversion with youth. I am certainly open to any questions or comments that you have. My contact information is on the screen, so don't hesitate to contact me. And just in terms of setting you on a trajectory, if you're not sure where to start, your first call should definitely be to the county attorney's office. Almost every county attorney has a pretty quality website, so you can give them a call and just ask them who's responsible for juvenile diversion. If it's not located in that office, they'll be able to tell you where it is, if it's at the court or in the juvenile probation or correction system. And they'll really set you on the right course. So have that be your first stop in trying to build a relationship to provide juvenile diversion services. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Now we'll move on to our panel discussion. We have 3 subject matter experts in youth fire prevention and intervention. We've got Jared Brown from Pathways Counseling Center. He is also the founder of the American Institute for the Advancement of Forensic Studies. We have Jen Rockhill from St. Paul Youth Services. Jen has a lot of experience doing interventions with kids as a team approach. Jen is with Social Services. And Marilyn Arland, Deputy Chief at Maple Grove Fire Department. Marilyn put together a program when we still called it Juvenile Fire Setter, and she's built a great team in Maple Grove. So this is our panel of experts. I would like to ask, since we're talking about coalition building, Jared, how do we find people like you in the field in greater Minnesota and all over the country for that matter? How do we find mental health care professionals to work with us?
Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everyone. Again, my name's Jared Brown. Excellent question. Kathy and I had the opportunity to meet a few years ago at a training that I put on through my Forensic Training Institute. and the topic was on youth who set fires. And what I realized is a great deal of mental health professionals have little to no experience in working with youth who set fires. So I thought it would be a good idea to form a connection with Kathy and begin writing articles, educating the mental health community, and bridging a gap between the fire professionals and the mental health world. And I think we have a long way to go in Minnesota, but I think we've made some great strides these last few years. And it is a difficulty finding professionals who specialize in treating youth who set fires. But a few recommendations I would have if you do come across a child or a youth who do engage in these type of behaviors is really try to find a therapist who understands the complexities of a lot of these issues these children face. For example, memory problems, learning impairments, attachment difficulties. Some of these children may have ADHD, problematic home environments. They may be bullied in school. So there's a whole array of issues that these kids present with besides the fire setting behaviors. So I would definitely recommend, if you are a fire professional, also obtain a release of information with that therapist or counselor or mental health professional so you can work hand in hand with that individual, because I think the best way to treat these juveniles is done by a community of professionals, not just fire setters, not just law enforcement, and not just mental health or educators, but all of us coming together.
Great. And Jen, how do we pull in social services component to this?
Social services also has a very similar problem where with fire setters in particular, many people are not comfortable working with them or don't necessarily understand what's going on. And so the big thing is to kind of get them focusing more on some of the other issues that are actually part of the fire setting. One of the great things about working in the fire programs that I've done is that I was able to team with firefighters along the way. So I worked with a firefighter in Cottage Grove. I've worked with you on different projects. And so let the firefighter come in and be the firefighter expert, and then let you do what you do. And so for us, it's finding out, okay, what kind of assessments might this child need? If the fire setter has some issues around trauma and attachment or fetal alcohol or a variety of different mental health diagnoses, then you're going to want to help connect them to those different pieces. You're going to want to help them connect to county services if it's necessary, where you're getting them a mental health case manager or even a developmental disability case manager in the cases of autism or fetal alcohol. And then you want to be looking at what other services might help. What kind of after-school activities might be useful for them. There are a number of different therapeutic programs that will work alongside a therapist or a psychiatrist where they're looking at medication options. And so for the social services, it's really finding a group of people that are willing to help you access services. And as most people will tell you who have tried to access these services, it's not easy. It's a really difficult process and sometimes can take a long time. And so really connecting to a county system or to a case management system or to an agency that will help access resources is a huge key factor, because they're typically the ones that know the best places to go for different services.
Great. And Marilyn, how did you put together your multidisciplinary team when you were starting?
Well, honestly, it was a process. I think, I went to training first, kind of got my forms together, things that I was going to use in my program, and mental health was one of those that was kind of like, wow, what do I do with that? And I guess I felt pretty naive at the time, so I just kind of opened up the Yellow Pages. Back then we used Yellow Pages. Opened up the Yellow Pages and just looked for the mental health people in my community, and actually some of the neighboring communities as well, because back then there weren't as many. And I just went and took my stuff that I was using, my assessment forms, my release forms, my waivers, and went and visited and just knocked on the door and introduced myself, told them what I was doing, what my experiences had been, showed them the assessment that I used in the program to help determine the motivation of the youth, and I just didn't give up. I just kept knocking on doors until I found people that were interested, that were willing to get involved. And I found some wonderful, wonderful people out there that were just made a huge difference in the program.
So how did you keep your program going for so long? Did you get these people together, or how did you maintain that motivation?
Well, at that time, we were really busy. We had a lot of kids in our program that were being referred to our program. I also got very involved with our police department, knocked on their doors, their offices, and went and talked to them, told them about the problem that we were facing. We had many, many kids that were coming into our program from different referrals, whether it was parents or teachers. I also went to all of the schools in Maple Grove, and I introduced myself to the principals, told them about the program and the things that we were finding in our community with kids that were either starting fires or playing with fires, and parents calling. And so that added to that program and got them involved. The police department, probably for any fire department, is probably one of the most important people as far as getting the referrals, I believe. Because I think easily 95% of our referrals come from our police department. We're a combination, paid-on-call, full-time department, but we only have 10 full-time people. But the police officers are out on the streets every day. They're out there, they're dealing with problems, they're running into things, they're finding kids that the fire department would never even know about. And if all of the police officers in your community know about your program and they understand what you do and that it's a professional program, that you've been trained, the people who work in the program are trained, you're using assessment forms that are proven, and then you talk to them about that, they become people who will refer kids. And like I said, they truly are probably the highest percentage of referrals that we get.
And you also worked with juvenile justice in the courts, right?
Yes, and it seemed like everything kind of fell into place. The need was there, so you had to figure out how to work it out. And at the time, juvenile justice was a piece that we really needed to also get involved in the programs, because honestly at that time, when a kid would come into the program, a child would come into the program, if they needed mental health counseling, it was all voluntary, and it is today as well for the most part. And so if the parents weren't willing, but you knew the child had a great need for it, it was kind of a dead end for you. So that meant going to Hennepin County, and it was just picking up the phone, asking who worked with the kids in the county attorney's office, and I met the most wonderful person there, Susan Crum at the time, who was the prosecutor in the juvenile justice system, and she got the judge involved, and everything just started clicking. And it was just taking the time and the motivation to go out and knock on the door and find the people who could help you and people who were interested in being involved, and not giving up. You just keep knocking on the doors until you find the right person.
Awesome.
I was going to add to that, actually, because when I started doing work with youth fire setters, it was in a diversion situation, which means taking kids that would normally go through the court system, be involved in the justice system, potentially detention centers and those types of things, and getting them out of that system and trying to work with them in a different way. And courts were desperate for options to work with fire setters in particular, because it isn't something that the average population feels confident about. And what I quickly learned, because I didn't feel confident about it either, I knew very little about fire. What I quickly figured out is that working with fire setters is a team effort, as Jared said. It really does take multiple disciplines. And so what you do need is the work like Marilyn did, where you're finding people that are willing to come together and put their expertise on the table. So I don't claim a fire expertise to this day, but I've learned a lot because I've partnered with the experts. And so it really is about finding that team.
Right, and that sounds like a lot of work at the onset, going to knock on doors. It might be a little intimidating going to knock on the juvenile justice, the prosecuting attorney's door. But in the long run, it really saves time, because then it's not just something else that the fire service has to do. Now, Jared and I have talked about this briefly, but everybody's got their jargon in the different disciplines. Jared, what are are some key terms for us to know when we go knocking on a mental health care therapist's door or do a Google, do a Google search on it?
I think it's important to really understand how attachment disruptions play into these cases. Untreated and unresolved trauma, that could be post-traumatic stress disorder, grief and loss. One of your parents ends up being deceased, or high conflict divorce cases. And then on top of that, really understanding cognitive impairments, which can relate to traumatic brain injuries, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and learning problems. Because, for example, if you have a youth who's 16 years old and sets a fire, chronologically they're 16. Developmentally, it's quite possible they may function at a 5, 6, or 7-year-old level. So the way you talk to them needs to be modified in terms of the intake forms, your assessment, the questions you ask them in a interview or an interrogation type of setting if you're a law enforcement officer or arson investigator. So all of those factors need to be taken into account. And I think it's so imperative, again, to go to as many of these trainings as possible, even if they don't necessarily directly relate to fire, indirectly they do.
So Jared, are there things that we should know about doing interventions with some of the different kids? Like you said, fetal alcohol syndrome, maybe autism spectrum disorder. Should we modify our program for them?
I think so. There's not a lot of research out there related to those topics in relationship to fire setting. So I think every case is so different, and it has to start with a thorough screening by a fire professional or a law enforcement officer, and then sent off to a mental health professional for a comprehensive evaluation. And if you take it a step further, maybe some of these cases they need to be sent off to a medical doctor for a medical evaluation or a neuropsychological evaluation, which is basically a term to really understand how they process information, how they take that information in, and then how they process it and use that in everyday life. And a lot of these kids struggle with everyday living. And one of the terms we use in the mental health world is adaptive functioning deficits. They may struggle with money management problems, living independently, communicating their thoughts appropriately. And it's so important to look at each case individually because every fire case is so different.
Jared, if you can just elaborate on why these teams are so important, why the multidisciplinary aspect?
Because if you're not working in a team, things get missed. The more people who are trained in these complex topics in the allied fields such as mental health, probation, corrections, fire service, educators, the more likelihood we're going to catch one of these individuals who lights fires early on. And early intervention and screening has the best outcomes typically. And if for some reason we're not catching these individuals, a high percentage of these kids may go on to increasing the severity of their fire setting behaviors. They may go into other types of criminal behaviors, and then in adulthood they may engage in a host of criminal justice involved activities. So again, I just stress the importance of all of us communicating and working together as a team, especially within the fields of criminal justice, fire service, medical, and the education world.
Jen, do you have any other comments?
I do. In my current position, I'm lucky enough to work with some kids that have some pretty significant traumas, some significant adverse experiences in their childhood, and really are in need of massive teams. And I can tell you from experience of working with these kids that if there isn't a team of people working together and someone helping to facilitate that team, things do get missed all the time, and a lot of times they're key pieces to those puzzles. And so being able to work with someone who can keep the team going, whether that's your fire professional who has created a team for herself and for their agency, or it's the therapist who's checking on what are different people doing, or case management like I do, where it's, okay, this is my psychiatrist, this is my firefighter, this is my police officer, this is my therapist, this is my school personnel, and keeping them all working in the same direction and making sure that every voice is heard, because different people come from different positions and have different ideas.
Great. Marilyn, what are your thoughts?
Well, for firefighters who are out there that are working with youth, that are setting fires or playing with fire, when you do that assessment, you try to figure out what's going on and what's motivating the fire play or the fire setting. At some point, you're going to run into a problem that you can't deal with. You don't have the training to deal with, and so having those people that you know that are available that you can refer kids to for mental health, law enforcement to help, the county that you live in, to possibly get this kid into a program through a diversion program, to get them to come to your program mandatorily if you need to do that. All of those people can help you help the kids get what they need to get better and to stop fire play and fire setting.
Marilyn, do you think schools are reporting all of their cases of youth set fires?
Do you know, in our school district, I would say absolutely no years ago. But again, it's an educational piece. Those people that are at the school district and at the schools are professionals in education, and they may not know or understand the whole spectrum of youth fire setting and fire play. And so by contacting those people and getting to know those people and sharing that information, as well as the program that you have, kind of opens up something for them. First of all, they find out more about youth fire setting, and that it's not just a kid acting out, that there may be a lot of other reasons. And by making those contacts, all of a sudden now you may have, whether you have 2 schools in your city or 10 or 20, all of a sudden all of those professionals have their eyes open to all of the kids in your community. And that can be a huge resource for those kids, as well as, getting them into your program.
Great. Does anyone else have any comments?
I can just say there are some services like Marilyn mentioned, where you can work with your county and contact them. They have a lot of different resources, and they can help you direct you as well. And they have a lot of partnerships out there, so they're a good place to call. And if it's in the moment and you just don't know what to do with yourself and what's happening there, don't hesitate to call for help. Just because you call the fire department or the children's crisis line in your county, it doesn't mean that you've criminalized your child and that there's going to be major problems. It really just means you're asking for help. And the more that you can do that voluntarily, the more that schools reach out and say, I need help with this kid, because they know somebody now that they can call for help, the more likely you're going to get people to cooperate together.
Right. And we're not trying to criminalize the child, just like you said. And I like to put it, your daughter needs help in math, you're going to go get help in math. This is just another behavior that we can help to stop. I'd like to thank everybody for coming today, and I hope this was helpful. Please check out our website. We continue to upload resources for the YFPI teams throughout Minnesota and the world, and you can always feel free to email me as well.